Welcome to another video here for, well, this video will be used in both political theory and political science courses with me, your host, Dr. Selby. So you could be watching this video in a bunch of different places because I use this triangulation protocol almost all my courses. It's so important to me, so important as a way to make reliable judgments about the world, about causality, scientific judgments about factual and causal claims. So the video is titled Triangulation, Using Science to Understand Politics. And let's move forward. There we go. So let's start by going back to, or some of you might be just doing science now, but reminding ourselves of our approach to science in this course. So first, science is the attempt to explain natural or social behavior. But we can never be 100% certain, and one of the main goals of the scientific method is to quantify uncertainty. We also live in a world in which it's not always easy to acquire information, even where our brains sometimes want to jump to conclusions, especially if these conclusions reaffirm our previously held beliefs, right? So remember, rational ignorance makes it difficult to sort through all the information, and we don't just know what's going on automatically. And confirmation bias is a cognitive tendency in our brains to focus on the things we want to hear and to discount and make go away, don't look, I don't see it, the things we don't like to hear, okay? And remember the is-ought distinction here, right? Values are good. There's nothing wrong with values. Don't ever take it as Professor Selby says values are not good. Values are great, but they're just not science, and that's not what we're doing when we're doing science, okay? So it's always okay to be motivated by values. So in many of the research projects in my classes, I'll tell you this. Like, if you're motivated by values, that's fine. You just have to then go through the scientific process in good faith. And all that means is you do it according to the scientific criteria, right? You don't cherry pick your information to prove yourself right. So the method we're going to learn is called triangulation. But let's continue with a little more science first, and then I'll explain triangulation. Remember also we learned about the three parts of science: theory, method, and observation. And method is how we gather our observations, okay? So triangulation is a common method in the social sciences. It's used other places as well, by the way, but it's very common in the social sciences, and it has many advantages for our purposes here. Some of these advantages, and this is not even a comprehensive list, but it's really enough for us right now. We don't have to go out there and gather a bunch of data ourselves. Rather, we can look at answers that are already out there, right? No one has the time to do original research design, right? Second, it's useful for both introductory and expert teachers because, as I said, we don't have enough time to set up a research design for each and every question that comes up. And third, it's a method that helps to factor in all kinds of political bias. Well, any bias, but especially political bias. So what is triangulation and how does it help? I'll just move my face real quick so that you can see how does it help. What is triangulation and how does it help? Triangulation is the method of using many methods and looking at many answers that you gather from across the political spectrum and then performing a critical analysis of those answers, okay? It factors in political bias. So this is good. This is really helpful. So basically, you want to read scientific research from across the political spectrum. There's pages here to look at, right? Depending on which class, it might be in a different place or look a little different. But one of the main ones that you need to use here is the research help and tips page, where I give you a list of places to go to do your research. Don't forget, I'm helping you, right? This is me helping you, okay? Often it's best to get as many as 6 to 8 different answers, okay? Often it's best to get as many as 6 to 8 different answers. Once you have gotten these answers and really thought about them, okay, we'll then perform our critical analysis. Now, here's the basic idea. If all the research agrees, we're looking good, let's go with that answer, right? Maybe in the future it'll change. Maybe there's a little bit of disagreement. Well, we're pretty sure it's in this relatively narrow range, but it might be, something like that. On the other hand, if the research doesn't agree, then honestly, that's good too. Okay? If the answer is we're not exactly sure, then that's the answer. And scientists are okay with that. Well, we're not sure. Okay? As long as this is what's really happening, then we're good. Okay. First, let's start with a research question. So one of the things that we've been, let's take a research question that we're curious about. Remember, research questions, there's three types. Could be data, could be comparison, or it could be causality. Triangulation is particularly helpful with causality, but a little bit can be helpful with data as well. Okay, data is more just straight factual type data. It's how much X questions. So let's imagine a research question like, what effect does increasing the minimum wage have on job creation? Notice this is a properly written research question that does not address values or assume the answer. And in most of my classes, I'll move my face again. In most of my classes, we will have looked at this before, okay? Not all my classes will look at the op-ed comparison that I do, but for most of us, at some point, you get these two op-eds, one conservative, one liberal, and you just kind of compare and contrast them, right? So most of us have looked at this before in more of a news. I mean, those are like policy wonk type people. Policy wonk people are people who are doing hard research. They care about the numbers, but it's still more of a news kind of feel, okay? The conservative approach here, the conservative causal sequence, and remember a causal sequence is an arrangement of variables to construct an explanation, is that as costs for businesses increase, they either have to find efficiencies by having the same amount of workers do more, or pass increased costs to consumers, right? The liberal causal sequence is that, well, first they kind of rebut the conservative one. Well, businesses have a lot of cost and they can find efficiencies without having to reduce workforce or pass costs on to consumers, right? Or even just take a little bit less profit, right? Like, okay, maybe just take a little less profit. Therefore, as workers get paid more, they will have more purchasing power, allowing them to buy more goods and services, actually increasing the total amount of jobs because of the increased economic activity. So again, we have seen this before. Seen this before too. Move my face just a little bit. On the level of theory, connecting cause and effect, these are both rational, right? Remember, a theory is a rational construction of a cause and effect sequence. So that's a causal sequence, right? Now, our confirmation bias might want us to pick the answer that we like, that confirms our pre-existing set of beliefs, but we're not going to do that, okay? This is why we're going to gather observations using our method of triangulation in order to have a more reliable approach to understanding the world. As scientists and university students, our interest is following the research. So let's move my face again. So what is our research question? What effect does raising the minimum wage have on job growth or job creation, is how I put it earlier. And then here's our triangle. You'll recognize this from the same page. I copy and pasted it over from the Canvas page that we all use, okay? But then I just typed on the inside how many answers to this question that you can find. So the question's at the top of the triangle, and then all the answers are at the bottom that you're gonna find. And when you do this, you're probably not just gonna say yes or no, you might add in a little more discussion and things like that, but I'm just giving us the basic idea here, okay? And then we have political lean, left, middle, center, right, answer given. more jobs, mixed, minus jobs, right? And this is just hypothetical. I mean, my guess is you'd find something like this. You know, in this case, I didn't go and drag it all out. I've been doing this, I've been up and down this minimum wage question a bit, but I didn't, you know, this is just an example. And, I don't know. It's probably what you would get. That's my guess. And we're just using it as a sample anyways. So this is why we call it triangulation. We put the answer at the top. You get all your answers, right? And then you look at what they're all saying. If there's a strong majority, say 6-0, 5-1, 8-2, something like that, that clearly breaks one way, then you will write in your paper, there is a consensus that raising the minimum wage will have a negative or positive effect on job growth, whichever one we found. But one reason I picked this question, it's a good question where we're pretty certain we're not going to get this like strong break. Most of your questions, you probably will get a pretty strong break. That's my guess. The scientists tend to be more in agreement than the politicians on a lot of these things. If there is a weak majority, or if the research breaks even, then you will write in your paper, the evidence is mixed on how raising the minimum wage will affect job growth. And then you need to explain each side of the question here, right? So you want to explain, why one group thinks yes, why one group thinks no, exactly like that. And sometimes it's quite important to be very explicit about how you are triangulating, okay? But not always. So let's say you find two different estimates for a piece of data, something like how many minimum wage workers are there in the US. I'm certain we don't have an exact count, right? Like 50 different states, there's a lot of different systems. Who knows, right? I'm certain there's some, the count isn't exact. It's probably not bad. I think we probably do pretty good. So I just kind of, I believe the number I saw was 16 million, and then I just did 14 to 18, but I think it's actually pretty, somewhere around 16 million. But in these cases, it's pretty easy. Just kind of like report the range. We're like, well, there's somewhere between 14 and 18 million minimum wage workers across the entire U.S. Okay, sounds good. Which would be about 1 million in California would be my guess, because maybe a little bit more, because California is about, wait, no, it might be more. No, it's about right. Anyways, just doing a rough cut based on population. But some instances of triangulation are harder, especially questions related to causality. In these cases, you may want to spend as much as a paragraph or two being very specific about the political lean of each source, how they designed their research, and what conclusion they arrived at. And so let's say, second case here is maybe we did arrive at the final conclusion that there is some job loss. Well, in that case too, we want to be clear about a little bit, a lot, a ton, right? How much job loss? If we're barely losing jobs, but helping a lot of people, I don't know. Now that's the trade-off that we have to really think about, right? That becomes the trade-off, if that's what's happening. There we go. And so it is very important to get into the details, right? If you were doing this minimum wage thing in your paper, which obviously you're not going to, because I've kind of taken you through it, so this one is not one that we're going to do. But if you're going to do this, I would really want to see a lot of the details, because everybody knows this is a difficult question, and that the academics really are fighting about. Okay, so you can't just read the conclusion. It's terribly important to get into, as best as you can, the details of how each study sets up their methods. But the conclusions are really important as well, right? I mean, we're not just going to ignore that, but we want to make sure we have a complete picture of what's going on. As you read and begin to understand how different studies do their research, you will intuitively start to see how research design often affects the answers that we get. When our research design strongly affects the answer we get, then the underlying data is more uncertain. So our uncertainty goes up, right? Like that's why when we get mixed results in triangulation, we say, well, we're not really sure. More uncertainty. This is often the case with mixed results in triangulation. Remember, not knowing the exact answer is the best answer, as long as it really is the answer. But that's true, right? Just like polls in 2016, where Hillary and their polls were kind of all over the place between Hillary and Trump, and what that told us was that there was a volatile electorate underneath, and that what we were looking at was particularly difficult to measure that year. Well, okay, so let's, I'll give you I've sort of given you the basic idea here, but let's just look at some of the facts on the minimum wage. This would be types of things you would be looking at in your paper if you're doing a current policy section. Not all of the triangulation will be doing current policy, but what is the current policy? Well, federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. In some states, workers such as agricultural workers and servers are exempt so long as their tips or piece rate bring them up to $7.25. That should say or instead of piece rate, or piece rate bring them up to $7.25. In California, the minimum wage is $16 an hour with no exceptions that I'm aware of, not even agriculture anymore. I believe it was the case until a few years ago. Correct me on that if I'm wrong. And we just recently passed this $20 an hour for fast food workers, right? So, pretty high for fast food workers. So what's been happening, right? Well, look, we haven't seen massive job loss. Like the worst of the doomsday dire predictions definitely hasn't come true, but it's really hard to know the counterfactual of, would we have more jobs if the minimum wage had stayed lower, right? And there's a question about increased cost, which just would be another triangulation we would have to do, right? So I'm not going to take us through every single thing related to the minimum wage because it's not necessary. We're using this as an example, but go triangulate that, right? And yeah, it seems like there is some bit of a transfer, but not that much. It's actually much less. From what I've seen, it's much less than you would expect. There's a different problem here too, which is everyone thinks the minimum wage is such a great way to help lower income persons, but it's not clear that it's actually as well targeted as it could be. A lot of minimum wage workers are 16, 17, 18-year-old middle class kids who are working summer jobs, night and weekend jobs just to make some spending cash, right? You work at Baskin Robbins, Starbucks type, although Starbucks pays more than minimum, so it'd be like your local, or at least they used to, your local coffee shop, right? So I mean, it's like if you're a middle class kid, like, yeah, it's great to have a job, but the difference between 14 and 16 bucks an hour, certainly you like having that extra money, but we're not pulling people out of poverty, right? And if our goal is to like really target programs to pull people out of poverty, then minimum wage isn't going to hurt. Clearly, many people are very poor and working on minimum wage. What's the exact percentage? That's a great research question. I don't have the answer to that, but it's not everyone, right? So there are some concerns about that. But a few years ago, I already said this sort of piece about it doesn't seem like the worst of the dire predictions are coming true. But a few years back, it was almost 10 years ago, I had a student at a different university I was working at, and he was very smart. He was going to transfer someplace really nice, and I said, "Man, we got to get you a job on campus as like a writing tutor or something like that." And he said, "No. I'm working at Burger King. I'm making 18 bucks an hour." This was 10 years ago. California minimum was like 12 or 13 at the time. He was making $5 over the minimum wage. He got the hours he wanted. So they were like, yeah, we know you have to go to school. He got mostly weekend hours, right? He was making really good money, $5 over the minimum wage at Burger King, right? Good for him. I was like, oh, well, yeah, that's good. Don't work for the school where you're chasing, you're working minimum wage and you're working 2 hours a day and, chasing undergrads and stuff like that, okay? Oops. So, keep that in mind. And that might be why we haven't seen as much of a job loss from the the $20 an hour minimum or job or cost pass through, because maybe a decent amount of the workers are already making more than that. That would be another really interesting research question. How many fast food workers or maybe they're already at 19. So okay, they get $1 raise, but there's a big difference between going from 16 to 20 and 19 to 20, right? Well, my guess. You might have seen, most of my classes have seen this one before in the rational ignorance protocol. I don't mean for this to be the end all be all, but like I said, I've been up and down this one a bunch of times. I'm always very curious about it. It's a really great debate for our class. So there you go. But this is John Schmidt. This is from 2013. So this was like actually when I was first starting to teach, and I was putting together my own teaching method. It's not really a scientific method, but it's my teaching method, right? So I've been kind of doing some similar things since I first finished grad school or soon after graduate school. Economists have conducted hundreds of studies of the employment impact of the minimum wage. Summarizing these studies is a daunting task, but 2 recent meta-studies analyzing the research conducted since the 1990s concludes that the minimum wage has little or no discernible effect on employment prospects of low-wage workers. The most likely reason for this outcome is that the cost shock of minimum wage is small relative to most firms' overall cost and only modest relative to the wages paid to low-wage workers. Okay, fine. Well, let's get back into some details. I actually went and looked for this, like I said. I've been following this for a while, right? So a few years ago, when California first went to like 16, it's like 4 or 5 years ago, exact same public conversation, right? Exactly the same that like the 2 op-eds that we've looked at. It's going to be all the job loss. It's going to, oh no, it'll be good, blah, blah, blah. Okay, same public conversation. And one of the things that happened and that I found, and I spent like 30 minutes looking for it, which is a long time during the semester. Like in the summer, I can spend time like really, I was like, oh, where is it? I'm going to find it. And I remember these op-eds, and I was like looking, and it's like 30 minutes. That's it. That's all the time I can dedicate to this. But when you got into the studies, one of the main things that both sides agreed on this. One of the main things that was happening was businesses with the increased minimum wage, what they were doing, they weren't cutting total hours, but they were choosing to hire one person at 40 hours a week rather than 2 people or more part-time. Interesting. Isn't that interesting? And a lot of it, there's a lot of reasons here and stuff like that. I don't want to get too much into the reasons. Come to my office hours. I'm happy to chat to you about my suspicions here. But, whatever. Businesses were finding it more in their interest to just have one person, very reliable, shows up every day, works 40 hours, or, a few of those one people, right? But rather than managing a whole bunch of floating sort of part-timers, let's just have a solid group of full-timers was basically the logic. Now the question here becomes, does turning 2 or 3 part-time jobs into one full-time job count as a job loss? And like I said, both sides agreed about this. This is what makes it so fascinating, right? And one of the main things that the conservatives were saying was like, well, look, like someone had a job and now they don't, so that counts as a job loss. And I think that's fair. I totally get that. At the same time, I'm not sure it's completely fair to count a part-time job as a full job. Like if one person's working 40 hours a week and someone's working 20 hours a week, 40 hours a week is a job. That's standard 40-hour week. That's what a job is. And if you're working 20 hours a week, you're working a part-time job. And we call it part-time because you're not working a full job. You're not full-time, right? So even just in the language that we're using, it's sort of indicating that like we don't really view part-time jobs as full jobs. So, where does that leave us? Well, this is just really interesting, actually. You like pull up underneath the hood and you're seeing, what are we seeing? Our method, the way we're counting jobs is strongly affecting whether we're seeing job loss or not. Okay, and if yeah, I mean, if we had a sandwich and we cut it in half, give two people a half sandwich, they each have a half sandwich. If we take a half sandwich back from somebody and give it to the other person, now it's a full sandwich, right? Yes, I know that person does not have sandwich. They might be hungry. I'm not going to argue that. But I don't think we should be counting half sandwiches as full sandwiches either. That's a tough one. All right. And $20 might be the upper bound. I'm absolutely certain about this, that the benefit, well, I'll show you my next thing. This I feel very confident in, and I could be wrong. Dude, show me the research. I don't care. But this is my best guess. I just did this on a board when I was up at Sac State the other day, okay? But, what are we seeing here, right? This is just Selby sort of like throwing, doing a quick chart for us, right? And in the middle here, going straight down the middle, is minimum wage. So increase in the minimum wage, right? And I did two cases. You could have done a third case, right? I feel pretty strongly that at the earlier level, where the minimum wage really is pretty low, there's some job gain. It might be low, it might be medium. I'm pretty sure it's not high, right? So remember I said just kind of like think about low, medium, high, right? So here might be kind of low. That's what I did with case 2, is kind of low. Case 1 is kind of medium. And then somewhere, and it might even be here, I have case 1 at $17 an hour. You kind of break even on job gain or job loss. Not exactly sure exactly, it might be 15, right? It might be 13. I don't know. But I feel somewhere in the teens, maybe low 20s. So case 2, I gave it up to 21. And, things change too, because as things get more expensive, you're not going to, the value of the dollar goes, inflation, right? Inflation's always happening. 2% is our target, right? So, it's a dynamic situation. And then, you're kind of stable. And then as you get higher, you're going to start seeing, more job loss. And especially what's going to happen there is just costs are going to get, you are going to have big pass through to consumers. Consumers are going to buy less of your goods. And, now we're going to have businesses going out of business. And where does that happen exactly? I don't really know. No one's exactly sure, right? But as far as the sort of theoretical model, this sort of makes some sense to me. I could be wrong. Show me the research. It's all I care about. Seriously, show me the research. Okay. So why? Why, Dr. Selby? Because you're so smart and brilliant. I'm kidding. I just have a sense of humor, which my wife doesn't always appreciate. I tell her, the more times you tell a joke, the funnier it gets. And she's just like, no, it's not. That's not true. All right, but notice here, right? Why do I think that there's more benefit in terms of job creation at the lower end of the minimum wage? 2 reasons. And I feel pretty strong about this. I definitely could be wrong, but I feel pretty strong about this. 2 reasons. 1, the cost to businesses at the lower end of increasing the minimum wage is much smaller, okay? And the benefit to workers is much bigger. So if we go from $7.25 an hour to $8.50 an hour, the marginal gain for workers is a 17% increase in purchasing power. If we go, I should have actually done to $21.50. If we go from $20 to $21, the marginal gain is 5. Actually, I should have done $21.25, which actually would be 6. So because that's the exact $1.25 increase, and so I should have done it that way. Now that I look at it, but a $1.25 increase from $7.25 to $8.50 an hour is a 17% pay bump. All that money is being spent for sure. You're like, wow, this it's extra $1. It's it's only an extra, even if you're working 40 hours a week, it's only an extra $45, right? It's not that much extra money, but you're definitely spending that money, right? Yeah, but at $20 an hour, the other thing that happens is, businesses have already been absorbing this increase. So, you know, the marginal increase to them, it's not just the extra dollar, but we also have to factor in the past marginal increases and stuff like that. So there is a little bit of an additive effect to businesses here. And the other thing is at $20 an hour or 21, right? This higher end of the minimum wage, more workers will be saving some of their money, which is good for their retirement, but not actually good for job growth, right? Job growth happens because dollars get respent and circulated through the economy. And if you plunk it in your savings account, that stops. It stops. You're no longer spending. If you spend it at the drugstore and then that person gets paid and that person goes spends it at the movie theater, and then the person who works at the movie theater gets paid, and then that person goes spends it back at the Dairy Queen where maybe you're working. That's called a cycle, right? And economies grow when money is circulating like that. When money stops, it's taken out of the cycle, okay? And like that's fine too. You don't need the money in the cycle all the time. This is one reason why, you know, the government messes with interest rates and stuff, because if it's too hot, we actually want to pull some money out of the cycle and have people save more. So you put the interest rate up, it makes it more rational to save. So you're pulling money out of the economy, okay? So this is our triangulation lesson. Hopefully you got a nice little lesson as well, and just kind of some comparison of how these different economists are thinking about things, and maybe learn something a little bit here at the end on how economies work with money cycling around. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it. Use it, right? Use it in your own papers. This is what I want to see. Have a great day, everybody.